Hey, how's it going, church? It's Pastor Tim. I want to talk to you a little bit about Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 20. We are working our way through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, and find ourselves in chapter 7, about midway through chapter 7. And Jesus gives some pretty firm warnings, right? He gives some pretty firm, direct instructions. Now, he just previous in the verses, just to give us some context, he's talking to the disciples and the believers, and he says this in chapter 13, and he talks about this idea of like, hey, God's kingdom, right? You can only really enter it through this narrow road. And then he talks about the wide road of the world, or the wide road that many are going to take. But this road to heaven is very, very narrow. So think in your mind this idea of traveling this road, this very narrow road to get to heaven and get to be with the Father in heaven. And then he immediately goes into this in chapter 15. Says this. Let me read the text to you. It says this: beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. It says you can identify them by their fruit, that is, by the way that they act. And then he goes into some descriptive language in regards to the difference between grapes and thorn bushes, figs from thistles. There are good fruit. Good trees produce good fruit, and bad trees produce bad fruit. And then it says this: yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. Now, we've heard all about, if you've been around church for any length of time, I guarantee you've probably heard about the fruits of the Spirit, and that's this idea of these fruits of the Spirit that will be evident in our lives as followers of Jesus. And though you can find those in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22, you can find all that there. But this isn't really talking about us. This is about us helping us to identify who we're listening to, who we're following. So like I said before, it's this road, this, he says in verses 13, you can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate, right? Through this narrow path. So picture that. Now picture along that journey, you have got people who look well-intentioned. Even the words coming out of their mouth in that moment sound great. Matter of fact, your heart may even be leaning that direction. They may say something to you that resonates. But what Jesus is saying, like along that road, that narrow road, right, through that narrow gate, beware of the false prophets. Beware of those who are going to say one thing, but they're doing another in their life. And that's why he gives the example of fruit. You see, if I was to plant a tree and it said that it was an apple tree, but yet it produced something else besides an apple tree, it's not what it says. So the proof is actually in the product. The proof is in what is coming out in that person. My dad had this saying growing up, and you probably have heard of it. It's not like his, but he would say this: the proof is in the pudding. He'd say that, the proof is in the pudding. So I was talking to Pastor Justin about this yesterday, about this saying, and so we did a little research, and really that derives from around the 14th century, and which was weird to me. But yeah, so they would make pudding, and so the proof that's in the pudding is in the tasting. That's the real saying. The proof that's in the pudding is in the tasting. So it may look good, but if it isn't good and it doesn't taste good, then it's not. Because they're a bad tree. They're producing bad fruit, these false prophets. And then nowadays with social media and all the news outlets, man, they've got something for everybody. Even with the internet, you can have some weird ideas about the world and search it. You will find groups of people who believe the same thing and will follow that leader or that organization. We have to be really careful about the voice that we're listening to. Who are we taking in? See, Jesus was really firm about saying, beware of false prophets. I love, he says, because they disguise themselves as harmless sheep, but they're really vicious wolves. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I used to watch The Roadrunner, and I remember Wile E. Coyote. He would kind of dress himself up in these little sheep and kind of get himself to the Roadrunner. You see it in all kinds of cartoons and different ideas. It's that same idea. They'll act and present themselves as one thing, but in the reality is it's another. What kind of fruit are they producing? We've all opened up an avocado, and it probably looked something like this. It was brown and gross, and we'd be like, we're just gonna toss this thing. You see, when you get into the inside of who people are, that is where you're gonna see their true self. How are they living out their lives? How are they treating others? Is it just mere words? Is it just because they're dressing a certain way, acting a certain way? I'll leave you with this. And I'm not really entirely sure where I got this, but it's I think it's something worth sharing with you. So I don't know who gets credit for this saying, but it's this: time will either promote you or it will expose you. That's right. Time is either going to promote you, because in time your true self comes out, or it's going to expose you for who you really are. And that's what Jesus is saying. Who are you listening to? What are you listening to? Do those ideas line up with the heart of Christ? Do they reflect the heart of Jesus, the gospel? Because some things sound great, but they lead to destruction. But the Word of God is his heart to us, so that we can walk near him and align our hearts with him. So I hope this was helpful to you today. Hopefully you're encouraged. And we'll see you next time. Have a great week.